good afternoon. Everybody hear me okay?
No.
I might have to talk really close to the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. It's an honor to be here with you all today, and I was just thinking earlier how much World War I expertise that there is in this one room, probably more than any other single room in the entire world. So it's that much more of an honor to stand up here and speak to all of you. Some of you know I've spent the past couple of years researching the unit that we now remember as the Lafayette Escadrille. As part of my research, I decided to retrace the squadron's footsteps as it made its way across France in 1916 and 1917. And what I wanted to do was to see how much evidence still remains of their presence. So today what I'd like to do is share with you a few items of interest that I found that illustrate this famed aviation unit's combat legacy, and one that still endures today, a full century later. Lafayette Escadrille was, as we all know, a French squadron that operated on the Western Front during World War I. It was one of history's earliest true fighter squadrons. But what makes it unique is that it consisted of American volunteer pilots entirely, except for its two French officers. So the first men assigned were the 7 Americans that you see here, and the 2 French officers standing in the middle. The various names that have been assigned to the squadron during its 22-month operational period have been long been a source of confusion.
Can't hear you.
You still can't hear me?
No.
We get any more volume on this mic? Because I'm speaking right pretty much into it.
I'll go check.
Yeah.
Yeah, they must.
Sure.
See if we can get this fixed before we go any further. See if the logs are still here. Yeah.
This should be a lot more comfortable for you if you prefer. Used this yesterday.
Work for you.
Yeah, I know. I don't know why it's down that one.
If you put that behind you. And just put this where it's comfortable. Right there you go. Here, it snaps off and goes the other direction. Yeah, we do. We do. Want me to turn it for you? Here, I got it. That should snap right up for you. I recommend it pretty high. Right there, right there. Now, give it a tap. And see if, go ahead and project a little bit and see if that works.
Does this sound okay?
Yes.
Everyone hear me okay? Great, great.
Move it up if you have any more problem.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So anyway, as we all know, the various names that have been assigned to the Lafayette Escadrille have caused a lot of confusion over the years. And it was first designated Newport 124, and then later became SPAD 124 when it upgraded to the newer and improved SPAD 7 fighter. The squadron also had more than one unofficial name. It was first called Escadrille American, but that soon changed to the more politically acceptable Escadrille Volunteers. When that name failed to generate any excitement, and it didn't, it was not liked very much by anyone, the squadron made its final name change to the one that we remember today, the Lafayette Escadrille. And this, of course, is in reference to the young French nobleman, the Marquis de Lafayette, who fought for our country in the American Revolutionary War. Now, there's also confusion between the Lafayette Escadrille and a larger group of 269 American pilots who flew for France during World War I. And this larger group, which included the Lafayette Escadrille, was known collectively as the Lafayette Flying Corps. The The Lafayette Escadrille, which was the only true all-American squadron, was just one part of the Lafayette Flying Corps. And this is an important distinction that's eluded many people over the years, and it's caused problems over the years, as most of us have seen. There were a total of 38 pilots who eventually flew for the Lafayette Escadrille during its 22-month operational period. During this time, 8 were killed in action. 1 was shot down and made POW, Harold Willis, and several received wounds. In terms of combat effectiveness, the Lafayette Escadrille was what I would call an average French squadron. According to the findings of Dennis Mcconnell and Frank Bailey, these 38 Americans officially downed a total of only 33 enemy aircraft. And of these 33, nearly half were credited to the squadron's own ace, Raoul Lufberry. So of the 38 Americans who flew for the Lafayette Escadrille, 25 failed to shoot down a single enemy plane. Now, if you think that I'm being critical, this is not critical. This is actually par for an average squadron in World War I. And I think you could probably say safely that most pilots who flew in World War I never shot down an enemy plane. It was a very, very difficult thing to do, much more than a lot of people realize today. So if the Lafayette Escadrille was really only an average squadron, why 100 years later are we still talking about it? We have a whole day dedicated to it today. And why have so many books and articles been written about this unit? And why does the French Air Force still honor its memory by continuing to maintain this escadrille on its squadron to this very day? Well, the answer is that in terms of its larger significance, the Lafayette Escadrille was anything but an average squadron. It was unique in that most of the Americans who volunteered to fly in it were much more than simply mercenaries. They were idealists who volunteered for a cause that they believed in, and we saw this in the film that we saw a little while ago. And you hear that this comes through loud and clear with guys like Kiffin Rockwell and others as well. And because of their ideals and the amount of publicity that they got because of that, they became household names on both sides of the Atlantic. And they helped sway what at the time was a rigidly neutral America, or American public, I should say, towards the French cause. Equally important, these 38 pilots were what one U.S. Air Force four-star general called the founding fathers of American combat aviation. In other words, they were the pioneers of our modern Air Force. So there are plenty of reasons why we still remember the Lafayette Escadrille, and it was a much more entity than its combat achievements alone would indicate. So at this time, we're going to speed things up a little bit, show you a lot more pictures and talk a little less about each one. I'd like to show you some of the historical landmarks that I found in France and the U.S. honoring the men of the Lafayette Escadrille. They demonstrate not only the significance of this squadron, but they in and of themselves are an important part of the squadron's enduring legacy. As you can see on this map, the Lafayette Escadrille served all along the Western Front from way over near the Swiss border, almost to the English Channel. They flew from 9 different locations, most of which I visited when I was in France. Most of the old flying fields are still simply fields, so they look today pretty much the way they did during the war. And I can say the same about most of the small towns that were adjacent to the aerodromes. They haven't changed a whole heck of a lot. And that's one thing that differentiates France from the United States. Things tend to stay the same for a long time. The Escadrille started life in the French resort town of Luxeuil in April 1916. The men were first housed here in this once imposing villa, and still stands today, although it it's definitely showing its age. Do we just get louder? See if I can move this down a little bit. Okay? Is that okay? All right. The men of the Escadrille lived in relative comfort here, and they only had to walk a short distance down the street where they ate their meals. And now we're talking about the first time they were at Luxor. They were there twice, and we'll revisit here again in a second. And here is where they ate their meals at the Lion Vert, which is still an operating hotel in Luxor. And they ate in that dining room right there. And if you can see, the windows in the upper right are the same as the windows that you see behind the blue car in the lower right. So the dining room, or the room itself, still exists, although now it's used for storage. The squadron remained in Luxor only a couple of weeks before they moved on to the Verdun sector at near Bar-le-Duc. But it returned a few months later, and during its second stay at Luxor, the men ate and lived in the Hotel de la Palme d'Or, the Golden Apple. And as you can see here, it also still exists, although now, today it is a kind of a nice little cafe. There's no hotel there any longer, but as you can see, the building still looks pretty much the same. Another marker in Luxor relating to the Lafayette Escadrille is this plaque that's prominently displayed at the City Hall. It was first dedicated in 1932, and it's been updated and maintained ever since. And this, of course, is how it looks today at the bottom and on the right. Before the squadron ended its second stay at Luxor, Kiffin Rockwell of Asheville, North Carolina, who we all are familiar with now after the film today, if we weren't already, was shot down and killed. And that was on September 23rd, 1916, 100 years ago last Friday. He was the second member of the squadron killed in combat. Victor Chapman was the first. His body was retrieved and buried in the town cemetery at Luxor. And here you can see his original grave on the left, covered with flowers, and the newer ones on the right that were placed in 1932. This is Kiffin's grave as it appears today in the Luxor City Cemetery. He's the only fallen member of the Lafayette Escadrille that we know of whose body still remains in its original site. Most of the other bodies were moved in 1928 to the crypt at the newly built Lafayette Escadrille Memorial. But Kiffin's was allowed to remain here in honor of a request that he made only the night before his death. He asked his friend, Paul Pavelka, and he said, if I die, he said, bury me where I fall. And he couldn't be buried in the front line, so he was brought back to close to the aerodrome at the city cemetery here and buried here. And for that reason, he was never moved from there. His brother Paul decided that he wanted to honor that last request. This is Kiffin's crash, which occurred just outside the village of Rodera, and a similar view as it recently appeared. He was diving on a German two-seater when the enemy observer fired a machine gun bullet into Rockwell's chest, and by all accounts, he was probably killed instantly. His Newport 17 continued diving straight to the ground, shedding its wings along the way, and the object that you see there on the upper right is a piece of his plane that was extracted from the crash, and this is from the North Carolina Museum of History. Kiffin Rockwell's crash site is not currently marked, so it was difficult to locate, but I did, using these two 1918 maps that I found in an archive. And you can see the one on the right is a hand-drawn map. It was written in a letter by a French soldier to Paul Rockwell because he wanted him to be able to go back and find because he had placed this cross and he wanted Paul to be able to go back and find this location again. So using this and also some images from Google Earth, I was able to kind of match up landmarks and locate, I believe, within a few feet of where he crashed. For several years, the site was marked, and here in the center you can see Paul Rockwell mourning his brother's death at the original handmade cross that was placed by French soldiers soon after the wreckage was removed. The other two markers were placed later. The one on the left first, and then the one on the right was placed, I think, in 1932. I don't know when the one on the right finally disappeared, and I don't know if it was ever replaced by another. But as I said, as far as I know today, there's no marker there, unless there's been one placed recently. Although I didn't find anything at the actual crash site, there's a small nearby park with the markers that you see here. The plaque on the lower right, which was photographed by my friend Steve Miller, who's supplied me with many, many great photographs over the years. Thank you, Steve. It used to be displayed at a World War II memorial about a mile south of Roderin. But when I visited there 2 years ago, this one had been removed, so I don't know where it is now. In the U.S., there are also some markers honoring Rockwell, and you can see the two, the one on the far left and the far right are from his birthplace and the place where he grew up, and then the one in the middle is from the Lee Chapel at his alma mater, Washington and Lee University. Another part of the legacy of the men of the Lafayette that we can still see today are artifacts such as uniforms and ribbons and other personal effects which still exist in various museums such as this one. Although I did look for the Lufberry artifacts the other day and I didn't see them. I don't know if they've been removed or if they've moved to a different place, but there used to be a whole case of things that came from Roll Lufberry. But anyway, this was Kiffin's his uniform right here. On the left, you see Kiffin posing in his brand spanking new uniform that he bought after receiving his wings. And then the color photos of the same uniform is maintained at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. It looks almost brown. Does that look brown from there?
It looks brown.
It's actually green. And it shows green on my screen, but it's actually kind of a pretty green color, which you would never have suspected. So maybe some of the colors are going to be off today. Here's another example of one of Kiffin's tunics as it appeared then versus today. The color photo of it came from the North Carolina Museum of History where the tunic is maintained. The smaller photo on the extreme right, which came from here, the Air Force Museum archives, is of the type of wings that Kiffin wore. And I think when they first formed, they ordered, I don't know, between a few of them, the first 7, 10 guys ordered this set of wings from Paris and had them made, and then later on they moved on to other things.
No, they were purchased in rail stations around Paris.
Oh, okay.
They just adopted them. They just caught on with the Aviator. You can see a lot of pictures of the French guys wearing them.
Another interesting artifact that I located, albeit with some difficulty, was what I believe to be the original so-called bottle of death that you see here. This piece of Lafayette Escadrille folklore is probably familiar to most of you, but it started life as a bottle of very old and rare whiskey that Paul Rockwell sent to his brother Kiffin after Kiffin downed the Escadrille's first enemy airplane. And after Kiffin took a swig, he passed it on to the next guy. When Victor Chapman stood up and stopped him, he said, well, instead, why don't we reserve this exclusively for any pilot who's just shot down an enemy airplane? And so, for that reason, it became known as the bottle of death. And it apparently turned up empty, of course, in the estate of William Thaw when he died, and it's now maintained by the American Friends of Blerinscourt Museum in France. In May 1916, the squadron transferred from the Vosges sector at Luxeuil to the Verdun sector. Here they flew from a high rocky plateau overlooking the city of Bar-le-Duc just outside the small town of Bayonne. Just across the dirt road running alongside the aerodrome was the old farmhouse that you see here on the left. It appears in a great number of squadron photographs from this period. It's in the background mostly. But as you can see, it's still standing and it looks almost exactly the same. And if you look at on the far left at that damaged roof, you can see today it still sags there where it was, that's the way it was repaired in that sagging manner. So it's changed very little. The pilots and mechanics from the squadron used to sit at picnic tables, and you can just sort of see a picnic table there on the left, in front of this building and drink wine. And you can notice that the old painted advertisement on the wall that's still visible today. And to me it proves, it's a link between then and now, because it proves to me that because World War I has always been a black and white war to me, because any pictures you see pretty much, except for a few, are black and white. And when I see something in color like this, it proves to me that these guys actually saw the same colors that we do. They weren't seeing everything in black and white. Minor point, but it strikes a chord with me. You could still sit at this location today and enjoy a drink if you wanted to, like Shoto Johnson, Lawrence Rumsey, and Bert Hall are, that you see here in the forefront of these two photographs. The only problem is you'd have to sit on the ground because the picnic tables are gone today. Here's my favorite then and now view of the old farmhouse. I'm sure most of you have seen this by now, but on the left are William Thaw and French ace Charles Nungesser, who spent several weeks flying with the Escadrille. And it always amazes me at how much, when you look at a really good quality picture, the old one to a new one, how similar they looked. And there's very little change. Another old structure that played a part in the lives of the American pilots of the Lafayette Escadrille was this old building. It's located at Plessis Belleville, where the French GDE was located. And as you know, here's where the newly trained pilots awaiting orders to the front flew. And the surrounding fields are just big, wide open, flat spaces, so it's probably a great place to fly from. But several of the pilots stayed in this old hotel, and many of them wrote about it, including James Norman Hall and Edmund Genet. And by all accounts, it was, as Genet called it, a rotten little hotel. But it was conveniently close to both the flying field and the railway station. So today it appears to be an apartment building, and you'd never guess all the history that it represents when you see it today. James Mcconnell was another fallen pilot from the Lafayette Escadrille with a lot of markers in his honor. He was shot from behind and killed while attacking another enemy plane. He crashed into an apple orchard just south of the town of Flavy-les-Martels and was buried where he fell. The middle photo shows his original grave, complete with the barrel of his machine gun, if you can see that right on the front of it. But before the war ended, the French soldiers built a more elaborate marker seen in the upper right here. And on the lower right is a piece of the fabric from his crash, as was recently displayed at the University of Virginia. A new marker was dedicated at the original crash site in the year 2000. And on the right is how it appeared 2 years ago. And the original flowers that you see growing here were planted in 1917, and the lady who planted them vowed that they would never die. And the French have meticulously cultivated flowers around this marker ever since then. And of course, McConnell's body is no longer buried here. He's in the crypt of the Lafayette Escadrille Memorial. He was moved there in 1928. A memorial service for Mcconnell was held a couple of weeks after his death at the American Cathedral in Paris, and the scene on the left was taken outside the church just after the service. On the right is the same view as it appears today, unchanged except for the missing men. Another striking memorial to James Mcconnell is this monument, which is located on the campus of his alma mater, the University of Virginia. It's called the Aviator, and it was created just after the war by a little-known sculptor named Gutzon Borglum, and who much later gained greater fame as the man who created the National Monument at Mount Rushmore. Other markers dedicated to Mcconnell are located in Carthage, North Carolina, where he lived and worked when he decided to join the war. The obelisk on the left is situated next to the courthouse, and the beautiful mural that you see in the lower center was just recently completed. The markers on the right are at the local airport where a museum in his honor recently opened. Another Lafayette Escadrille founding member who died in action was Norman Prince. His plane snagged a high-tension wire and crashed late one autumn afternoon while he was returning from a combat mission, and he died 3 days later from complications. And here you see on the left Prince's funeral procession as it marched through downtown Luxor, and on the right the same view as it appeared recently. His body was eventually moved from his original grave at Luxor to this beautiful setting in the Washington National Cathedral, and I'll take this opportunity to mention that I think a lot of you already know this by now, but there's going to be a 100th anniversary celebration of Prince's death at the Washington National Cathedral, and it's scheduled from Friday, October the 4th, which is 2 weeks from the day, and he died on the 15th. So Friday, October 14th is when this ceremony is going to be, and it's sponsored by the Prince family and the U.S. World War I Centennial Commission. Another member of the Lafayette Escadrille to die in combat was Ronald Hoskier. He and a French enlisted man named Jean Dressy decided to take the squadron's lone two-seater, it was an outdated Moraine parasol, out on a patrol. And they believed that a properly manned two-seater was a better fighting machine than a single-seater. And they intended to prove it, but unfortunately they were ambushed by 3 German fighters and shot down just outside of the town of Bruges. As with Kiffin Rockwell and James Mcconnell, there are a lot of markers in France honoring Hoskier. And the one that you see here is located in the Bruges Town Cemetery. And this group of local French historians showed me the marker and the crash site. And the story is that this monument was originally placed at the site of the crash, but when the farmer got tired of plowing around it, he threw it down a dry well. Well, concerned citizens went and retrieved the monument and placed it where it is right now in the cemetery, where it remains today. The small marker that you see at the lower left now hangs on the wall of the local school. Here's a Hoskier crash site, again, in this case then and now. And the French gentleman who took me here told me that they wanted to place a roadside monument here at some point in the future to mark the spot. Because if it hadn't been for them, I would have never known where the location was. The images that you see here to the left of center are from the church in the village of Étalon. Hoskier's father helped rebuild this church after the war, and he used the opportunity to honor his dead son. The brass plaque on the right hangs today inside the American Cathedral in Paris. Courtney Campbell was the last man to die in action while a member of the Lafayette Escadrille. And here you can see him smiling next to his Newport 23, which had just lost its lower left wing in midair as he was stunning over the flying field at Chadun. He was shot down and killed on October 1st, 1917 by a German observer. And it's one of those odd quirks of war that he happened to be the 6th man in a row from the squadron to die in combat on a Monday. The plaque that you see here is in the chapel of his alma mater, the University of Virginia. Raoul Lufberry was, of course, the ranking ace and the absolute superstar of the Lafayette Escadrille. And on the right is a rare Seminole Indian head insignia taken from one of his Spad fighters. And if you look closely, you can still see the exhaust stains on it, which were never removed. I photographed this at the French Air and Space Museum at La Bourget, where it is on display. Major Lufberry was killed in combat on May 19, 1918, after he had transferred to the U.S. Air Service. He either fell or jumped from his Newport 28 while attacking a German two-seater near the town of Maron. His memory is preserved in the town center by this plaque, which was originally located in front of the house near where he fell. And this plaque, when I went to go see it, was actually corroded and green. This picture was taken a couple of years or a few years earlier by Steve Miller, but hopefully it's been cleaned up by now. And I'd like to mention here that Mr. Raoul Lufberry III, who's here with us today, has just submitted a very detailed package to the United States Postal Service in an effort to have a commemorative stamp issued in Luf's honor. And I can't think of anyone more deserving of this, and I hope if any of you have any political clout or anything you can do to help this along, it would be great, because I think we need to see Luf on a stamp before the end of World War I, Centennial time. Paris played a very important part in the lives of the pilots of the Lafayette Escadrille. It's where they went to forget about the war for a few days, or a few hours in some cases. And apparently they were too busy having fun to take a lot of pictures in Paris, because you don't see very many of them. But here's one that's one of my absolute favorites. It was taken in front of the Invalides on July 4th, 1917. And I couldn't tell that this was a cannon at first. I thought they were sitting on a sewer pipe or something, but I figured out it was a cannon, and I thought, well, where are there cannons in Paris? And then this is the obvious place, because I have a whole row of them out in front of the Invalides. So I went there, and sure enough, actually I went on to Google Earth first into the ground view, and I could see that the background was the same. And so I took this picture just for fun. And you know, and some people think that the then and now pictures are kind of a waste, but to me they're a link between the past, between then and now. And it kind of proves to me that these things really did happen. And I've talked to a lot of folks here since I've been here, and I've told them the same thing, that to me it's worthwhile to see an old picture as it appears today, because it is that little link between history and now. And here's another interesting shot that I was able to reproduce. And here you see Paul Rockwell and future Lafayette Escadrille pilot Paul Pavelka. He was a Legionnaire in this photo. But they're posing in front of a statue, and I could not figure out where this was, because it was mislabeled on the back of the photograph. And so I was walking through Paris, and I came upon this. I saw this thing on the right, and I said, geez, that's it right there. And so I took a picture of it. And what it is, it's a statue of a lion. It's located next to one of the bridges spanning the same river. The men of the Lafayette seem to congregate a lot at the Chatham Hotel Bar, which is no longer in existence. when they went to Paris, but they also spent some time here, Harry's New York Bar, and it still serves French 75s, which you can see there, those yellow-looking drinks, to Lafayette wannabes like this rowdy-looking group led by Mr. Jerry Hester. He was a bad influence on us all. He wanted us to keep having more, and we said, no more, no more. This important monument, located in Paris, honors all the American volunteers who died for France in World War I. And inscribed on it are the names of both the American pilots and the soldiers from the French Foreign Legion who died in action. Of course, the greatest tribute of all is the magnificent Lafayette Escadrille Memorial, which is located a few miles west of Paris. To get there requires a 30-minute train ride from the St. Lazare train station and a fairly brisk walk of about 15 minutes. But if you're ever in Paris, it's worth going to the trouble because it is really, truly worth seeing. It's magnificent. It's beautiful. The monument was a joint Franco-American effort that began just a few years after the war. France provided the 10-acre plot of land, and construction was funded entirely by donations, in many cases by the pilots and their families. The monument was completed and dedicated on Independence Day, 1928. And with many of the wartime pilots in attendance, along with their families and their friends and a lot of dignitaries. The keynote speaker at the event was the U.S. Ambassador to France and former governor of the great state of Ohio, Myron T. Herrick. Apparently there was a fair amount of confusion even back then as to whom the memorial was meant to honor. The name and the symbolism on the monument itself, as you see here, imply that it was intended specifically for the men of the Lafayette Escadrille, because that's all I'm seeing is Escadrille Lafayette. And so you would assume from this that it was meant for the squadron, the Lafayette Escadrille. But clearly this wasn't the intent. In spite of the monument's name and all the symbolism, it was obviously meant to commemorate all Americans who died flying for France. The names of both Escadrille and Flying Corps members, you can see them engraved all over the monument, and the bodies of both flying groups lie in the crypt below. And it's really too bad, I think, that they didn't name the monument in the first place the Lafayette Flying Corps Memorial, which is really what it is. But even back then, people thought that the two terms, Lafayette Escadrille and Lafayette Flying Corps, were pretty much synonymous, which, as we know, are not. The crypt of the memorial contains the bodies of 49 airmen from the Lafayette Flying Corps. In addition, there are approximately 19 vaults that are empty for various reasons, including, coincidentally, these four right here. The remains of all these four pilots are elsewhere. The crypts are empty. As you can see in these pictures, and I could have put a lot more in here, but I didn't want to belabor the point, but I took these only 2 years ago, and at that time the upkeep of the monument and its grounds was obviously lacking. Proper maintenance and the damp, low-lying environment that it sits in required far more resources than were ever allotted for it. And it eventually reached the point where it was literally crumbling, and the once majestic structure was becoming an out-and-out eyesore. Fortunately, a group of patriotic French and American citizens, including Mr. Jerry Hester, who's with us here today, decided to address the problem before it was too late. They formed the Lafayette Escadrille Memorial Working Group, and they began collecting funds to make the repairs. And as you can see from the dollar amount up here, it's been quite an expensive project. By now, most of the issues have been addressed, including the important structural repairs, as well as aesthetic issues that affect both the monument itself and the surrounding grounds. more funds are needed to complete the renovation, but the good news is, as we heard earlier today, that all maintenance responsibilities are in the process of being transferred to the American Battle Monuments Commission. And so for that reason, it seems likely that the monument will be cared for in a much better way in the future. So that's good news. If you want to learn any more about this project, you can, rather than write down that complicated web address, you can just Google Lafayette Escadrille Memorial Restoration, and you'll see a link that will take you to the website. This brings us to the recent rededication ceremony for the memorial, which took place this past April 20th, which, as you know, was the 100th anniversary of the formation of the Lafayette Escadrille. I was privileged to attend this impressive event, and I can report that our French friends pulled out all the stops to make sure that it was worthy of the fallen Lafayette Airmen that the memorial is intended to honor. As you can see, the event was well attended, even though security concerns mandated that it was by invitation only. It was a blue sky day, perfect for this solemn event, which symbolized a strong bond which still exists between the United States and our oldest ally, France. There was a highly visible military presence from both France and the U.S., and the organizers thoughtfully installed a big screen so that those of us standing back in the peanut gallery could see what was going on up there. So it was well done in every respect. Dignitaries included the Secretary of the U.S. Air Force, who gave what I thought was the best speech of the day. Another prominent American who contributed to the program was John Yellowbird Steele. He represented the Sioux Nation by offering a traditional Native American incantation. The Lafayette Escadrille, of course, used as its final insignia a Sioux warrior in full headdress. The flyovers by French and American military aircraft were a true highlight of the event. Here you see a U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber from Minot Air Force Base making a very rare appearance over Paris. And accordingly, the French Air Force scrambled fighters and staged an interception. They couldn't pass up the opportunity for the practice. But fortunately, as far as I know, there were no shoot-downs recorded for that day. Here's a flight of U.S. Air Force F-22 Raptors from Tyndall Air Force Base via Lakenheath Memorial. And there are also flyovers by a formation of French fighters and by an old World War II era open cockpit biplane. It was a Stearman. It wasn't a World War I. Apparently all the Newports and Spads were still at the front, but it was still good. The idea was a good one. This is one of the beautiful wreaths that was placed in honor of the men of Lafayette. There were several of them. And perhaps the most important part of the legacy of the men of the Lafayette Escadrille is their descendants. And several family members attended the rededication festivities in Paris, and I met several of them. And we're also privileged to welcome some of them here with us today. And with that great lead into our next event, I'll bring this to a close. Thanks for your attention.
Steve, I have a question. The way I understand, I don't know much about the history of the memorial, perhaps, but in 28, when it was dedicated, there were funds set aside for its perpetual maintenance. Can you talk a little bit about what?
Yeah, there were a lot of funds. There was a man by the name of Cromwell, who was an American, who was an attorney in Paris, and he donated, I forget the dollar amount because it was a 1928 dollar, but it was a lot of money, and everybody said, oh gosh, that's fine, it would be no problem. But as it turns out, over the years, this monstrosity required so much maintenance, upkeep, and repairs and so forth, that it turned out not to be nearly enough. So over the years, it just kind of gradually went downhill. And the land that the French contributed for this monument was also pretty low lying. And so the creek tended to flood, and hopefully a lot of these issues with this most recent project have been addressed, and it won't be so much of a problem. And you know, the American Battle Monuments Commission has fairly deep pockets, so I'm hoping that they'll be able to do a good job with it in the future.
Just keep paying your taxes.
That's it. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
Steve, that graphic of the Lafayette Escadrille with all of their pictures in ovals, the top biggest one is of Norman Prince, and you got to wonder who put that graphic together. Do you know?
I think Norman Prince's dad probably did that.
Yeah. You know for sure?
No, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I've seen that. There are 2 or 3 versions of that. Some of them have the wrong men on there. Some have members of the Lafayette Flying Corps, and some leave off members of the Lafayette Escadrille. But this one is called the Valiant 38, and I don't know where it originated. Probably one of the reunions from the Lafayette Escadrille, but I found it in an archive somewhere, and I scanned it at really high resolution so you could actually see it. Yeah. Jerry?
Phase 2 of the monument restoration is a gift shop, an improvement of the caretaker's cottage, better parking, better signage, and security. It does not want to lapse into a hangout or a place of perversion. So that's the phase 2 ongoing right now. So there is opportunity for donation, but the Lafayette Escadrille working group essentially has got their job done, but still they're handling the administration at the ABMC headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, to handle phase 2. And the public, we hope, will respond in kind, but the traffic is picking up tremendously out there, and we just want to make sure that there's no graffiti or anything like that that takes place.